My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore, and I am 68 years old. For nearly 5 decades, I was a wife, a mother, and the quiet heart of Hazelbrook Orchards, a small organic apple farm nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. My hands, though stiff now with arthritis, still remember every rhythm of the soil, kneading dough into sourdough loaves for the market pruning trees at dawn alongside Richard, my husband who smelled always of earth and hope. The orchard was our world, our cathedral, our legacy. For years, I believed it was also the anchor that bound our family together. 3 weeks ago, I buried Richard. He was my partner since 1981, my friend, my safe place, the man who built every fence post and whispered every prayer beside me. He died of pancreatic cancer after 14 months of fading away piece by piece. I watched as the strong man who once lifted crates with ease and sang to the trees as though they were children grew frail, his voice swallowed by morphine. And because he was stubborn, he didn't want our children to know the truth until the end. Let them live their lives a little longer without the shadow, he whispered one night, his skin papery against mine. I kept that secret, and it ate me alive. But I loved him, so I obeyed. The irony is, by the time he died, Darren and Samantha were already far away, not just in distance, but in spirit. Darren, my eldest, had buried himself in Boston's financial world, speaking in numbers more than in feelings. He hadn't been home more than a handful of weekends in a decade. Samantha, my free-spirited daughter, drifted from one failed wellness business to another, always needing just one more loan, one more chance, always finding her father's savings like a bottomless well. I told myself that grief would bring them back, that losing their father would remind them of the roots that fed us all. I told myself that standing in the orchard at his funeral, they would finally look up and remember what we once were. But I was wrong. When they arrived, I didn't see children mourning their father. I saw professionals assessing an estate. They moved through the house with the careful detachment of people preparing a portfolio, not a family. Even that night, after we laid Richard to rest, I sat alone at our worn kitchen table, staring at the woods scarred by years of laughter and tears. I told them we could sort through Richard's belongings together the next morning, that it would be a way of remembering. I clung to the hope that grief could still knit us together. The morning sun spilled through the lace curtains Richard and I had picked 30 years ago. I brewed coffee the kind Richard loved, simple, no frills. But when they came downstairs, Darren in his crisp blazer and Samantha in her silk blouse, they looked like they were heading to a boardroom, not to sit with their mother in mourning. Darren set his mug down carefully, his precision a mirror of his father's, but his tone cold. "Mom, we've been talking," he began. Samantha glanced at him, then at me, her lips pressed tight. They thought it was time to start settling things, the estate, the business, the house. I blinked, the words slicing through me. Settling things. As if Richard's life, my life, our orchard could be broken down into numbers on a page. Darren explained it was practical. I couldn't run the orchard alone. The house was too big for someone my age. My age. Those words landed like a stone on my chest. Had I not pruned trees through blizzards, carried crates heavier than my own body, driven tractors and baked pies for fundraisers? Samantha chimed in smoothly, as though rehearsed. There was a retirement community 2 hours south. Sunnyvale Estates, filled with activities and friends my age. They wanted me out. And then Darren pulled out a folder. A will. He claimed Richard had signed it last year, leaving everything to him and his wife Melissa. I looked at the paper, the signature too neat, too steady, too unlike the hand of a man dying under morphine. This wasn't from our family lawyer. I said it aloud. Darren insisted it was legitimate. Samantha urged me to see it as a fresh start. A developer was offering $7 million for the orchard. They wanted to sell it, level it, erase Richard's life's work, replace it with cul-de-sacs and concrete. I stood with trembling hands stacking breakfast plates just to keep from screaming. My voice, when it came, was soft but firm. "Show me the will again tomorrow." I went to bed, my heart heavy. But deep inside, I knew there would be no tomorrow conversation. This wasn't about grief. It was a coup orchestrated and timed with precision. That night, I lay awake in the bed Richard and I had shared, listening to the groans of the farmhouse walls and the whisper of the apple trees. Every sound was familiar, yet my children had become strangers to me. By morning, the smell of imported coffee, not the warm, simple kind Richard adored, crept under my door. When I came downstairs, they were waiting coats on a suitcase packed. My suitcase. Samantha smiled too brightly. We packed some essentials for you. Thought we could drive to Sunnyvale today, just to look. I'm not going to a retirement community, I said, pouring coffee. Darren checked his watch impatiently. Mom, be reasonable. The paperwork is done. We close with the developers next week. I stared at him. This man who once followed Richard through the orchards asking about bees and frost, now looking at me as though I were an obstacle. I said I needed my medication and some family photos. Samantha's relief was palpable. Take whatever personal items you want, she said, already dismissing me. Upstairs, I didn't cry. Instead, I reached behind the mirror in the medicine cabinet where Richard had installed a hidden panel decades ago. My fingers found what I had tucked away: my passport, my birth certificate, and a fireproof box heavy with something more powerful than their schemes. Inside was the deed to 20 acres of orchard land, purchased in my maiden name long before marriage. Land with water rights, land essential to the orchard's survival, land they knew nothing about. I slipped it into my purse, my heart hammering. When I came back downstairs, my purse was heavier, but my spirit lighter. Darren asked ready. I nodded calmly, let them think I was defeated. They drove past the blooming fields, past the school where I once volunteered, past the library where I read to children. And then Darren veered off the highway onto a remote gravel road. 20 minutes later, he pulled over beside an empty field. He shifted the car into park, looked at me as though dismissing a meeting agenda, and said, "This is where you get off, Mom. The house and business are ours now." Samantha's smile faltered. Darren, what? But he cut her off. She'll contest the will, make scenes. This is cleaner. She has her clothes, her meds. There's a gas station 5 miles up. He opened my door. Just like that. They left me standing by the roadside with a suitcase I hadn't packed, as if I were a stranger and inconvenience to be discarded. The car disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving me with nothing, or so they thought. But as the wind tugged at my coat, I felt no fear, no panic, just the clarity of betrayal and the weight of the deed in my purse. They thought they had stripped me of everything, but they didn't know the soil beneath their feet. They didn't understand legacy. I began to walk not toward the gas station Darren had so kindly mentioned, but toward town, each step pressing pain into my blistering feet and purpose into my bones. The sun rose higher, warming the back of my neck, and I realized I wasn't broken. I wasn't abandoned. I was free. The walk into town felt longer than any road I had ever traveled, though it was only a handful of miles. My suitcase wheels caught on gravel, dragging like an anchor behind me, but I didn't stop. Each step was fueled by something deeper than anger, something primal, something protective. My children thought they had stripped me bare, tossed me aside like an old coat they no longer wanted. But they had forgotten one thing: I had built my life from nothing once before, and I could do it again. The gas station Darren had mentioned appeared on the horizon, its neon flicker faint against the morning sun. I didn't stop there. Instead, I kept walking until I reached the edge of Hazelbrook, the town that had watched me grow from a young bride to a widow. People glanced at me curiously. Rumors spread quickly in places like this, and I knew whispers of Richard's funeral had already woven their way into every corner shop. But no one stopped me, no one asked. Maybe they didn't know how. At the public library, I slipped inside. It smelled of paper and dust and faint lemon polish, a comfort I hadn't realized I missed. I sat at one of the computers, my hands trembling as I typed through tears. My first search was for the developer Darren had mentioned, Eastbrook Properties. Their name blared across article after article: farmland turned to subdivisions, historic homes flattened for shopping malls. They were ruthless, efficient, and well-funded. But as I read, something hardened inside me. They might have millions, but I had something they didn't. I had blood in the soil. I had Richard's legacy. I had the deed. My second search was for lawyers, not the kind Darren hired in glossy suits, but someone local, someone who understood more than contracts. And there he was, Michael O'Connor, family law, and estates, an old name I remembered from church potlucks. His reviews weren't flashy, but every comment spoke of patience, persistence, and integrity. I wrote down his number with shaking hands. That night, I didn't go back to the farmhouse. I checked into the Hazelbrook Inn, a modest place with quilts on the beds and a kind woman at the desk who didn't ask why my eyes were red. Alone in that room, staring at the floral wallpaper, I let myself cry. Not for Darren, not for Samantha, but for Richard. For the years we built together, for the trust that had died with him, for the children who had grown into people I no longer recognized. My sobs racked me until I was empty, and then, in the stillness that followed, I felt a strange calm. The next morning, I met Michael O'Connor in his small office on Main Street. He listened quietly as I laid everything out: the suspicious will, the sudden push to sell Darren's cruelty on the roadside. When I showed him the deed to the 20 acres, his eyebrows lifted. "This changes everything," he said, his voice steady. "That land isn't just symbolic. It controls the orchard's water access. Without it, the farm loses value and the developers can't proceed." His words were a balm I hadn't expected. Power. I had power. Not in anger, not in threats, but in the law, in the truth. Over the next weeks, Michael and I worked together building a case. He uncovered that Richard's signature on the will was indeed forged. The ink dated to months after Richard's hands had grown too frail to write. We traced it back to Darren, who had coerced Samantha into witnessing it. Betrayal layered upon betrayal. Yet as each truth unfolded, I didn't feel weaker. I felt stronger, as though every lie exposed was one less chain around my heart. But strength is not the absence of grief. Each night I walked by the orchard from a distance. The blossoms had begun to open, filling the air with their sweet perfume. I remembered Richard teaching Darren to graft branches, Samantha running between the rows in a sun hat far too big for her head. Those ghosts followed me, whispering of the family we once were, a family I feared was gone forever. Then one evening, as the sun bled pink across the sky, I saw Samantha standing at the edge of the orchard. She didn't notice me at first, her face drawn and pale. When her eyes met mine, she flinched as though burned. "Mom," she said quietly, "just one word." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I waited. Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't want to leave you on that road. Darren made me. He said it was the only way to keep things clean." Her voice cracked, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to curl into my lap with scraped knees, begging me not to let go. My heart twisted. "You stood by and let it happen," I whispered. "I know," she sobbed, "and I hate myself for it." We stood there, silent, stretching between us like the rows of trees. Finally, I said, "It's too late for excuses, but maybe not too late for truth." I turned and walked away, leaving her sobs to mingle with the rustle of blossoms. That night, I lay awake in the inn thinking of her tears. I wanted to believe she was sincere. I wanted to believe my daughter could still find her way back to me. But trust is not built on want, it is built on action. And I had yet to see hers. The court date was set. Darren and his lawyers arrived in suits so sharp they seemed designed to cut me down. Samantha sat beside him, eyes downcast. I walked in holding the deed, the truth pressed against my heart. When the judge asked for statements, Darren spoke of practicality, of protecting assets, of securing futures. His words were smooth, but they rang hollow. Then it was my turn. I spoke not as a businesswoman, not as a strategist, but as a wife and mother. I spoke of the orchard Richard and I had built with our hands, of the decades of sweat and love of the generations who picked apples under those trees. I told the court of the forged will of the land in my name, of the betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge looked at me with eyes that softened just barely. And in that silence I felt Richard beside me, his hand on mine, steady and sure. The courtroom air felt heavy, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. My words still lingered in the silence, but Darren shifted in his seat, jaw tight, his polished facade beginning to crack. His lawyer cleared his throat and launched into a carefully rehearsed rebuttal, one full of jargon and technicalities, trying to frame me as a confused widow clinging to sentiment. They spoke of maximizing estate value and responsible transitions, but no amount of gloss could hide the rot beneath. Then came Michael, my lawyer, steady as stone. He rose and placed the deed on the judge's desk with quiet reverence. This 20-acre parcel, he said, was purchased by Mrs. Whitmore, in her maiden name Eleanor Grace Callahan, before her marriage. It contains the well and irrigation channels that supply Hazelbrook orchards. Without this land, the orchard cannot function. No developer, no buyer, no bank would touch the property without it. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. Darren's face paled, his arrogance faltering for the first time. Samantha covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Michael continued, his voice measured. We also present evidence that Mr. Whitmore's alleged signature on this will was not only forged, but notarized under false pretenses. Expert analysis confirms it could not have been executed on the date claimed given his medical condition. This is not just a matter of estate division. This is fraud. This is betrayal. The words hung there like a storm cloud, charged and ready to strike. Darren tried to interject, his voice rising. She's lying. She manipulated Dad, But the judge raised a hand sharply, silencing him. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore. I sat there, my hands clasped in my lap, heart pounding but my face calm. Inside, though, I was trembling, not from fear, but from the tidal wave of truth finally crashing against years of deceit. The hearing recessed for a short break. I stepped into the hallway, my legs unsteady. Samantha followed me, her eyes swollen from crying. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know Darren forged the will. I swear I didn't. I trusted him. I didn't want to lose what little connection I had left to him. I studied her face, searching for the girl who once picked daisies for me and whispered secrets into my ear. You stood by him, I said quietly. Even when he left me on the roadside, you let it happen. Her tears spilled over. I was a coward. I thought keeping the peace was safer than standing up to him. I was wrong. For a moment, I wanted to reach out to wipe her tears, to forgive her. But forgiveness is not an impulse, it is a choice earned through actions. If you mean what you say, Samantha, I told her, then prove it. Stand with me, not with him. She nodded, sobbing, but I turned away. Words were no longer enough. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge's decision came swift and sharp. The alleged will is hereby declared invalid. Control of Hazelbrook Orchards remains with Mrs. Eleanor Grace Whitmore. Furthermore, I am referring this case for criminal investigation into potential fraud. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder. Darren's face collapsed into fury, his fists clenching as though he could squeeze control back into his hands. Samantha sat frozen, caught between shame and relief. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high. For the first time in years, I felt not just like Richard's widow, not just a discarded mother, but a woman who had fought back and won. Yet victory carried a bittersweet edge. I had saved the orchard, yes, but at what cost? My children, flesh of my flesh, were strangers to me, now bound not by love, but by betrayal. That evening I returned to the farmhouse. The silence inside was deafening. Dust motes danced in the slanting light as I walked through the rooms. Richard's sweater still hung on the back of a chair, his boots by the door. I sank into his armchair, clutching the deed, and let out a long, trembling breath. The phone rang. I let it ring 3 times before answering. It was Samantha. Her voice was soft, hesitant. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to try. I want to help you keep the orchard. Please let me prove I can be different. My throat tightened. Part of me longed to say yes, to welcome her back into my arms. But another part, the wounded part, hesitated. We'll see, I said finally, my voice steady. Show me with actions, not words. She whispered a thank you, and the line went quiet. That night, I stood at the window, gazing at the orchard, bathed in moonlight. The trees swayed gently, their blossoms shimmering like stars. I thought of Richard, of the promises we had made, of the love that had rooted us here. I had lost so much, but I still had this land, this legacy, this strength. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt alive. The following weeks passed in a haze of work and whispers. Hazelbrook Orchards had always been my refuge, but now it was also my battlefield and my sanctuary. The townsfolk had heard everything the trial. Darren's disgrace, Samantha's tears, and though most offered kind smiles and gentle words, some couldn't resist the quiet murmurs. Imagine your own children turning on you like that. The words stung, but I lifted my chin. Let them talk. I knew the truth, and I carried it with me like armor. Each morning, I rose before the sun, just as Richard and I always had. I tied my hair back, pulled on my boots, and walked the rows of apple trees, the blossoms trembling in the dawn light. For the first time since his death, I spoke aloud to him, whispering into the wind. I saved it, Richard. They tried to take it, but I saved it. For you, for us. But the orchard needed more than sentiment to survive. The harvest was still months away, and the farmhands Richard once managed had drifted to other jobs in the chaos after his passing. If I was going to protect Hazelbrook's future, I needed hands, I needed help, and I needed to trust again. One afternoon, Samantha returned. She didn't come with excuses this time, nor with demands. She came in jeans and boots, hair tied back, a lunch pail in her hands. I want to work, she said simply, her voice steady, though her eyes shone with unshed tears. I studied her for a long moment. The Samantha I knew before would have balked at dirt under her nails, would have rolled her eyes at the monotony of pruning. But here she was, her shoulders squared, her hands open. I didn't smile, not yet. Then start with the northern row, I said, pointing. And she did. For hours she bent and worked, her face flushed, sweat dampening her blouse. That night, as we washed our hands side by side at the sink, I felt something stir in me, a flicker of the bond I thought had been lost forever. But trust is a fragile thing. It grows slowly like a seed in rocky soil. Darren, meanwhile, had not vanished. His lawyers sent letters, each one more desperate than the last, filled with veiled threats and empty promises. One warned of public exposure if I pursued criminal charges. Another offered a private settlement if I relinquished my deed. I burned them all in the fireplace, watching the flames devour his arrogance. Yet one evening, as I was closing the barn, headlights swept across the driveway. Darren's car. My breath caught my hands clenching around the doorframe. He stepped out in his tailored suit, but his eyes looked hollow, his face thinner. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "I need to talk." Every instinct screamed to send him away, but something inside me whispered that running wouldn't heal me. I folded my arms. "Say what you came to say." "Came to." He shifted uncomfortably. "I made a mistake. Melissa's gone. She left when the money didn't come. The firm, my job, it's all falling apart. I thought I was protecting the family. I thought I was securing our future. By leaving me on the roadside," I asked, my voice sharp as broken glass. His eyes dropped. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't know where else to go." I stared at him, the man who once held my hand at his father's grave, who once cried into my shoulder after his first heartbreak. My heart ached, but my spine stayed firm. "You have choices, Darren, but you will not find absolution here without truth, without change." For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, "I don't even know who I am anymore." I felt Richard in that moment, as if his hand were on my shoulder. My voice softened. "Then find out. Away from here. Away from what you tried to destroy. This orchard is not your redemption, it is your father's legacy and mine to guard." He nodded, eyes shining with shame, and without another word he turned and drove away. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. That night I sat at the kitchen table with Samantha. She poured us both tea, her hands trembling. "Do you think he meant it?" she asked. "I think he's broken," I said, "but brokenness doesn't excuse cruelty." We sat in silence, the steam curling between us, the orchard whispering outside like a living witness. Weeks turned to months. Samantha stayed. She rose with me in the mornings, worked until her back ached, learned the rhythms of the land she once ignored. Slowly the orchard began to heal. So did I. And as autumn arrived, the branches bowed heavy with fruit, the air rich with the scent of apples and earth. Families came to pick, children laughed in the rows, and for the first time since Richard's death, Hazelbrook felt alive again. One evening, as we stood together watching the sun sink behind the hills, Samantha slipped her hand into mine. "I don't deserve your love," she whispered. "Love isn't about deserving," I said softly. "It's about choosing. and I choose every day to protect what matters." She cried quietly, leaning her head against my shoulder, and in that moment, I felt a fragile thread knitting us back together, not perfect, not whole, but mending whole. And I realized something: revenge hadn't been my triumph. Vindication hadn't been my solace. My true victory was standing tall in the ruins of betrayal and choosing to plant again, to grow again, to live again. The harvest season arrived like a hymn of renewal. The orchard, which had seemed so fragile in spring, now hummed with life. Red and gold apples glistened on branches, the air sweet with their scent. Families filled the rows again, children tugging at their parents' sleeves, couples laughing with baskets brimming, the kind of joy Richard always said was the true profit of farming. Samantha worked beside me every day. She drove the tractor, hauled crates, and even learned how to guide school groups through the orchard tours. The townsfolk watched with curiosity, some whispering, some skeptical, but others smiled with genuine warmth. Slowly, she was carving out a place for herself, not just in the orchard, but in my heart again. But the wound Darren left still ached. I would walk past Richard's old armchair in the evenings and feel the ghost of betrayal brush against me. I wanted to forgive, but forgiveness is not a door you fling open. It's a lock you turn carefully, testing if it can hold. One afternoon, as I was checking the farm stand, a familiar figure appeared. Darren. He was thinner, his suit replaced with a wrinkled button-down, his shoes worn at the edges. He didn't look like the polished banker anymore. He looked like a man stripped bare. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't want money, I don't want land. I don't want to be alone." My breath caught. So many memories flashed: his first steps, his first day of school, his laughter echoing in the orchard. And then the memory of him leaving me on that desolate road, suitcase in hand dust, choking my lungs. My heart twisted between love and fury. "I can't let you back into this house," I said firmly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. What you did wasn't just cruel. It was a choice you made, knowing it would destroy me." He dropped his gaze, tears streaking his face. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But I need to start somewhere." I studied him, this broken man who was still my son. "Then start with yourself, Darren. Find honest work. Find humility. If you want to prove you've changed, it won't be through words. It will be through actions. Until then, this orchard is not your refuge." He nodded, silent, and left without another word. I watched him walk away, his figure small against the horizon. I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. That night, Samantha and I sat on the porch, the crickets singing in the dusk. "Do you think he'll change?" she asked softly. I sipped my tea, staring at the orchard glowing under the moonlight. "Change is possible," I said, "but not guaranteed. And it's not my burden to carry anymore." She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. For the first time in years, I felt peace, fragile, tentative, but real. As winter crept in, the trees shed their leaves and the orchard slept under a blanket of frost. Samantha and I planned the next season together, sketching ideas for cider tastings, school programs, even a bakery stand in town. Each plan felt like a seed of hope planted in the ashes of betrayal. But betrayal doesn't vanish. It lingers like a scar. Some nights I would dream of Darren's voice, sharp and cold, telling me to get out of the car. I would wake in a sweat, clutching the quilt Richard's mother had sewn, reminding myself that I had survived, that I had reclaimed my life. One snowy evening, Samantha brought me a small wooden box. Inside were photographs: Richard laughing at a harvest festival, Darren and Samantha as children perched on his shoulders, me holding a newborn in the orchard's shade. "I found these in the attic," she said softly. "I thought we should keep them where we can see them." I ran my fingers over the images, tears filling my eyes. "This was real," I whispered. "No matter what came after, the love we had was real." Samantha took my hand, and it still is, Mom. Even broken, even scarred, it still is. I held her hand tightly, the warmth grounding me. In that moment, I understood something Richard always knew: family isn't just blood. It's the choices we make to stand by each other, even when it hurts. Darren had chosen betrayal. Samantha finally had chosen love. Spring would come again. The blossoms would return, fragile yet resilient, and so would I. Spring came early the next year, the orchard bursting into bloom, as if the earth itself wanted to remind me that resilience is written into nature's bones. The trees wore crowns of white and pink blossoms, petals drifting like confetti across the grass. For the first time since Richard's passing, I felt the stirrings of joy return soft and hesitant, but undeniably present. Samantha was by my side each morning, her boots damp with dew, her hair tied back as she carried baskets or clipped stray branches. The townspeople had noticed her change. At the farmers' market, they no longer whispered about her failures. Instead, they asked about the orchard, about our plans for the season. Slowly, her name became tied not to mistakes, but to hard work. Watching her transform gave me hope that perhaps love, though fractured, could still be repaired. But Darren lingered like a shadow at the edge of my mind. I hadn't seen him in months. Part of me feared the silence, another part clung to it as relief. Then one morning, I found a letter in the mailbox. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakable, my son's. Mom. I've been working at a hardware store outside Boston. It's not much, but it's honest. I rent a room above the shop. I walk to work. No suits, no numbers, no lies. I think about you every day. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm trying. Your son, Darren. I read it 3 times, my hands trembling. The bitterness in my chest warred with something softer, something maternal that refused to die. Richard's voice echoed in my heart. People can change Ellie if they choose humility. I tucked the letter into my journal but told no one, not even Samantha, not yet. The orchard grew heavy with fruit as the weeks passed. Children ran through the rows with sticky fingers, laughter ringing out. Couples picked apples side by side, filling baskets with bright red and gold. Samantha suggested we start a small bakery stand by the barn selling pies and cider donuts. I agreed, and soon the sweet aroma of cinnamon and sugar mingled with the crisp scent of apples. Hazelbrook was alive in a way it hadn't been for years. One evening after the stand closed, Samantha and I sat on the porch with mugs of cider watching the fireflies dance. "Do you ever think about Darren?" she asked carefully. "All the time," I admitted. "He's my son, I can't just stop." She nodded, staring into the night. "I hope he finds his way. I hope we can be a family again someday." I placed my hand over hers. Family isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about facing what did, and choosing to move forward. That choice has to come from him. Her eyes filled with tears. "I want to believe he can change." "So do I whispered, though my heart still bore the scar of that roadside betrayal. Winter returned, blanketing the orchard in silence. Snow pressed against the branches, and the house groaned under the weight of ice. I spent quiet evenings by the fire, Samantha knitting beside me, the crackle of flames soothing the ache of memory. Then one bitter February night, the phone rang. It was Darren. His voice was hoarse, stripped of arrogance. "Mom, he said I wanted you to hear it from me. I testified today. Against Melissa's family. Against the fraud we committed. I told the truth. It might cost me everything, but it's the first honest thing I've done in years." Tears filled my eyes. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive, but I knew it was a beginning. "Thank you for telling me," I whispered. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "For all of it. I'll spend the rest of my life proving it if you let me." We spoke no more that night, but after I hung up, I sat in silence, the firelight flickering across the walls. For the first time, I felt not the weight of betrayal, but the faint stirrings of redemption. As spring returned once more, the orchard blossomed again. Samantha stood beside me, her hand warm in mine. And though the wound Darren left would never vanish, I knew this life has seasons just like the land. Grief and betrayal may wither us, but with time and courage, hope blooms again. And as I gazed across the sea of blossoms, I realized I was no longer living in the shadow of what my children had done. I was living in the light of what I had chosen to endure, to protect, to love, even when it hurt. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever faced betrayal from those you loved most, I ask you, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories told from the soul, and leave a comment with your own journey. Together we remind each other that resilience is possible, and healing can come even from the deepest wounds.